It was supposed to be a quiet Memorial Day weekend, just me and a few close friends getting together at a remote cabin in the woods. The plan was simple, some grilling, a few beers, and unwinding from our hectic lives, but I never imagined that what started as a simple getaway would turn into the most horrifying experience of my life. The cabin was old, built in the early 1900s, and had been in Jake's family for generations. It sat at the edge of a dense forest miles away from the nearest town. When we arrived, the sun was setting, casting an eerie orange glow over the treetops. Something about the place immediately felt off, but I shrugged it off as pre-trip jitters. We spent the first night laughing and telling stories around the fire, but as the night grew darker, the mood started to shift. Around midnight, Jake suggested we explore the woods a bit, said there was something he wanted to show us. I wasn't too keen on the idea, but the others were all for it, so I reluctantly agreed. We grabbed some flashlights and headed into the trees. As we walked deeper into the woods, the air grew colder, and an unsettling silence fell over us. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just dead silence. Is it always this quiet out here? I asked Jake, trying to mask the unease in my voice. Yeah, it's normal, he replied, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. After what felt like hours of walking, we reached a small clearing where an old, weathered monument stood. It looked like a grave, but there was no name on it, just a faded American flag draped over the top. What is this? I asked, my heart starting to race. Jake hesitated before answering. This is where it happened. The story goes that during World War II, a soldier came back home for Memorial Day. He had changed. Something about the war had broken him. He disappeared into these woods one night, and when they found him, he was different. They say he wasn't alone when he died, that something followed him back from the battlefield. I felt a chill run down my spine. Different how? They never said, just that his eyes were missing and his face was frozen in a look of pure terror. At that moment, the flashlight in my hand flickered, and I heard a faint whisper behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing, just darkness. Did you hear that? I whispered, my voice trembling. Hear what? Jake asked. But before I could respond, we all heard it. A soft, mournful cry coming from the trees. It was distant, almost like it was being carried on the wind. We stood frozen, listening as the cry grew louder and closer. What the hell is that? One of my friends, Mike, whispered, his voice barely audible. Before anyone could answer, the cry turned into a scream. A blood-curdling, soul-piercing scream that made my skin crawl. The trees around us seemed to close in and the air grew colder by the second. We need to get out of here, I said, my voice breaking with fear. We turned and started running back towards the cabin, the scream echoing through the woods behind us. I could feel something chasing us, something unseen, but horribly real. The ground seemed to shift under my feet and I stumbled, falling hard against the forest floor. As I scrambled to get up, I felt a cold hand brush against my ankle, and a voice whispered, "Stay!" I screamed and kicked, breaking free from whatever had grabbed me. My friends pulled me up and we ran without looking back, bursting out of the woods and into the clearing where the cabin stood. But when we got back, the cabin wasn't the same. The windows were dark, the door was wide open, and there was a strange, rotten smell in the air. Did we leave the door open? I asked, but no one answered. We cautiously stepped inside, and what we saw made my blood run cold. The furniture was overturned, the walls were scratched and clawed, and in the center of the room was that same faded American flag from the monument, now draped over the table. How did this get here? Mike whispered, his face pale with fear. Before I could answer, the door slammed shut behind us and the temperature in the room plummeted. The same mournful cry we had heard in the woods filled the air, but this time, it was coming from inside the cabin. We stood there, paralyzed with fear, as the flag on the table began to rise as if being lifted by invisible hands. The air grew thick with the smell of decay, and then I saw it, a figure, barely visible, standing in the corner of the room. Its eyes were empty sockets and its mouth was twisted in a grotesque smile. "Get out!" the voice screamed, shaking the walls of the cabin. We didn't need to be told twice. We ran out of that cabin and didn't stop until we were back in the car, speeding away from those cursed woods. We never spoke of what happened that night again. Every Memorial Day since, I can still hear that scream, feel the cold touch of that hand on my ankle, and I know deep down that whatever followed that soldier back from the war, it's still out there, waiting.